Evening all. If anyone was here last year, I spoke about cycling. I'm not going to mention cycling tonight. All I'm going to say is, while I was pedaling around the globe, the thought occurred to me was that I wasn't really going around the globe because I wasn't crossing the oceans. And that was a thought that stuck with me when I then pedaled from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego as well. All the time I was thinking, I'm pretty good at crossing countries and continents, but what would it take to cross the oceans as well? Now the opportunity came to start, as you saw in that 9-meter rowing boat there, when the Beeb commissioned a trip to go through the Canadian Arctic. This slightly odd-looking part of the world, which you probably won't recognise, is the archipelago up in the northeast of Canada, right up in the Arctic in the Nunavut territory. Now, even though I wanted to learn how to row a boat, this is not exactly where I thought I'd get my apprenticeship in the Arctic. They needed somebody who could film that trip and who could be an equal member of the team, because on that tiny boat there is no space for crew. This little place is called Resolute Bay. That's where our journey would be starting. Now, that is not at all what I thought the Arctic should look like, even despite all my research. So the first part about this journey was, well, we were there to take on something which had never ever been tried before. The journey we were going to was hopefully to the 96 location of the North Magnetic Pole in this little rowing boat. If anyone saw Top Gear when they drove to the North Pole, which I do in inverted commas because they went nowhere near the North Pole, they went to the 96th location of the Magnetic North. This is the journey that we were doing exactly from Resolute Bay up to the Magnetic North, but we were doing it in a boat. Now that, more than anything, is a significant statement of what is now possible. This journey could not have been done even 5-7 years ago. So if possible, it would be a statement of what's happening. So living in this space proved to be by far the most difficult part of the journey. Al and a few others here have experienced ocean rowing. That is a very, very confined space to live in, especially when you're in the Arctic North. Now, filming on that space became my biggest challenge. 4 of you sleeping in that space. Mark, that guy's called Mark as well, pulling yourself into the space underneath the boat to sleep in. You're stuck there for quite often long periods when the ice came in, when the fog came down, when you couldn't move at all. This is a picture of us just harvesting water to keep going. Without water, you can't rehydrate your food, you can't eat. Because it was 24 hours daylight when we were up in the Arctic, we would go and go and go when it allowed us. And when the weather was bad, we were stuck in that boat for long periods. When that photograph's taken, I was actually inside the tent. Something else we needed to watch out for. Right where the polar bears fed on the shore edge is exactly where we were as well. So I woke up to the sound of a shot, a banger being fired over the tent, and them scaring off that polar bear. The wildlife in the Arctic was the thing which blew me away the most. I mean, it was way different from what I expected visually in the Arctic summer. It's just not what I imagined. There was just so little ice cover, especially on the land. But the wildlife we saw was far more abundant and obvious. And of course, it almost never come across mankind. So filming the walrus, the polar bears, the bird life was just such an incredible privilege. I was aware that nobody had ever rowed through some of the passages of water that we were going through. Now, we had a boat, which was a rowing boat, but it was also sled-shaped underneath. It could be pulled, in theory, as a sled. Now, that's a 1.3-ton sled. So the theory was good, but there's no way to practice that on the English Channel. So it was really in anger that we got to test out for the first time whether this would work or not. Getting stuck in big ice fields like this is incredibly disorientating. It's moving around you very, very quickly, remarkably quickly on the currents and on the winds. It looks like a permanent landscape around you, but it's actually moving very, very quickly. When we finally got where we were aiming for, this arbitrary point, this crosshair of Latin Long, at the end of the expedition, we were so exhausted after 2 days and 2 nights of going, we put our head down for about 8 hours, woke up, and we were a mile from that point. It looked the same around us, but being in the middle of an ice field, of course, it's a very difficult place. Now, the last year, this whole apprenticeship in ocean rowing then took me into the Atlantic. So that was last summer. I was up in the Arctic. Took about 8 months to prepare for that. In comparison, I had 15 weeks off the back of the Arctic to come back, try and fatten up, madly fatten up. That was the most important thing to do between the expeditions, and get ready for this. Dropping the boat into the Atlantic Ocean. That photograph was taken in Tarfaya on New Year's Day this year. 15 weeks between major expeditions isn't a lot of time, but I was already rowing fit at least. The idea here was to try and break the world record for the Mid-Atlantic. Now, out of all the oceans that have ever been rowed, the Mid-Atlantic's by far the most frequented. I think to date there's about 520 people who have ever rowed an ocean. Slightly oddly, about 350 of them are British, whatever that says about us. Fantastic, sort of mad adventurers, but we've got a great heritage in this, and some say we're good at it. I soon found out that going across the mid-Atlantic wasn't quite as interesting as some of the land-based journeys I'd done before. That photograph you saw back there was a flying fish. Probably the most interesting thing that happens in the middle of the Atlantic is rowing through the middle of the night, watching your teammates and yourself every so often getting thwacked on the side of the head by a flying fish, which sometimes hurts quite a lot, but is always very, very funny. Now, we got to this point about 3.5 weeks in, and things were going pretty well. It wasn't a good season for the winds. You need to have the trade winds to go fast across the mid-Atlantic. You need a fast boat, you need a strong crew, but you need the weather, like the sailing boats do. We got to that point, day 27, and we'd given up on our initial dream, which was to try and go sub 30 days, but we still believed that we could go in under a month, in under the world record time, 33 days. But that point was the last tracker our GPS sent off. That photograph is taken after an ordeal which I will never ever forget, which was 14 hours in the water. I was rowing along on dawn shift when, without any warning, the boat flipped up, bow rolled off the side, and we were in the sink. We were in a lot of trouble. Everything we needed to survive was underneath that boat, and it took a long time, about 6 hours, to retrieve everything we needed. Finally, sort of call the mayday and wait for a Taiwanese cargo vessel to come and rescue us. Being rescued at 1 o'clock in the morning, climbing off a 6-man life raft onto a 180-meter cargo vessel has to rate as one of the most dangerous things I've ever done in my life. You could see from the state of my crewmates there just exactly what they'd been through. These guys were utterly incredible. Obviously, saving life at sea is part of the mariner's code, but the pride they took and the way they treated us over the next 10 days as we came back across the Atlantic was just astounding. And I can assure you, I won't be going back there again. Thank you.